Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. In a recent episode on the first Thanksgiving being in Virginia and not Massachusetts, I took some cheap shots at the Puritans of Plymouth and Salem because it's too tempting and too easy. I mean, how can you not take cheap shots at the Puritans? Am I right? Actually, perhaps the more pressing question is, why would you ever stop? So get ready for a fully armed episode of The Tom Daniel Show devoted entirely to showing how ridiculous the Puritans were. You know, each year when December arrives, we hear debates about what Christmas means and whether it's being celebrated properly, reverently, or too commercially. Some argue that the holiday has been secularized beyond recognition. They like to remind you that Jesus is the reason for the season. Others claim it's become too sentimental, too saturated with nostalgia and shopping. But centuries before the first mall Santa, the first televised Christmas special, or even before Mariah Carey ever belted out all that she wanted for Christmas, there was a very real and legally enforced effort not just to critique Christmas, but to eliminate it entirely, wipe it out, erase it, or in 21st century terms, cancel it. And it didn't come from modern skepticism or even atheists, but from 17th century religious Puritans, a movement convinced that Christmas was not holy but harmful. Christmas was not sacred but suspect. To the Puritan brain, Christmas was not a cradle in Bethlehem, but a trap for the soul. This episode examines that strange, nearly silent chapter in Anglo-American history, the only time English-speaking Christians formally outlawed Christmas. That's right. The Puritans canceled Christmas. We will not rush through it as though it was just some odd little historical footnote. Instead, I want to linger with the acoustics of the whole thing, its consequences, and its cultural aftershocks. To understand how a society could silence a holiday, we must attend closely to what Christmas sounded like before the silence, how it sounded during the ban, and what it sounded like when voices, literal and metaphorical, returned with a big fat hallelujah. Before the Puritans rose to political power, December across much of Europe was exuberant. Advent could be solemn, yes, but it was followed by feasting, fires, pageants, dancing, greenery, wassailing, and communal singing. Cathedrals resounded with polyphonic merriment. Village greens echoed with boisterous carols. Even taverns played their part, offering what one 16th century chronicler called the merry noise of Christtide, good fellowship. The season had spiritual gravity as well, with midnight masses, nativity tableaus, and liturgical dramas. Ordinary townspeople knew Christmas through sound, bells ringing across cold rooftops, voices weaving through candlelit chapels, choirs lifting hymns that shimmered in stone. By the way, there will be an upcoming episode of The Tom Daniel Show specifically about one of those songs and another episode about all those bells. Anyway, that sonic world in the eyes of the Puritan was not pious, but profane. They couldn't stand it. To them, Christmas had become a carnival of indulgence, masquerading as devotion. First of all, they objected to the date, claiming the Bible offered no warrant for celebrating Christ's birth on December 25th, and to the accompanying customs, which they viewed as remnants of Catholic ritual and even earlier pagan festivals. And yet, we've all heard that one Scrooge in our life every year who insists on reminding us that the artificial designation of December 25th as Christmas is directly tied to pagan celebrations of the sunlight returning after the winter solstice of December 21st. Now, the Puritans questioned the morality of feasting, while the rest of the year demanded discipline. Most of all, they believed joy, unless tightly controlled by Scripture, could lead straight to sin. To be truly faithful, they argued, one must resist not only temptation, but merriment itself. You can't be happy. In the eyes of the Puritans, if you're enjoying yourself, you must be up to something. Now, before I go any further, I feel compelled to address that annually recurring insistence that December 25th is just an arbitrary date tied to pagan festivals. Is that actually true? Well, not really. Kinda, partly, but not really. It's definitely oversimplified and misunderstood. One thing we know for sure is that the early Christian church did not celebrate Jesus' birthday at first. For the first 2 centuries of Christianity, Jesus' birth simply wasn't a liturgical concern. Their focus was on Easter exclusively. I mean, anybody could be born, but the real feat was resurrection. That's Easter. Now, only in the 300s do we find Christians beginning to calculate or speculate about a date for the Nativity. So how did they arrive at December 25th? Well, December 25th actually appears in Christian sources before there's any firm evidence of a deliberate pagan takeover. The earliest known reference to December 25th as Jesus' birth is from around AD 336 in a Roman almanac. Crucially, Christian writers don't explain the date as a conversion of a pagan festival. They derive it from theological calculations connected to the date of the crucifixion, which they believe to be March 25th. And they had an idea that prophets died on the same date they were conceived. Therefore, if you add 9 months to March 25th, then you get December 25th. This is called the integral age theory, and it shows up in early Christian writings. So one explanation is purely theological, not pagan, but what about pagan winter festivals? I mean, December 25th did coincide with pagan festivals, but timing alone doesn't prove causation. First, there's Saturnalia. It's a popular belief that Christians simply replaced the old Saturnalia celebrations. However, the historical reality is that Saturnalia was December 17th through the 23rd, not the 25th. So Saturnalia is not a match. Next, there's Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. This is the festival that most people cite, and it was celebrated on December 25th. It honored the rebirth or strengthening of the sun after the solstice, and it's tied to solar imagery, which Christians also used for Christ. But the earliest reference to Sol Invictus on December 25th comes from AD 274 under Roman Emperor Aurelian, decades after Christians had already identified March 25th as the date of the crucifixion conception. And as noted, the earliest Christian assignment of December 25th appears around AD 336. So, yeah, the timelines do overlap, but it's unclear who influenced whom. So, to summarize the current scholarly consensus, it is definitely not true that Christians just stole the date from pagan sun-worshipping celebration. But it's also not true that pagan festivals had nothing to do with it. Therefore, the most historically responsible conclusion is that December 25th emerged in Christianity first for internal theological reasons, and then later the presence of a pagan solar festival coincidentally on the same day reinforced it, popularized it, and supported the Christian feast, but did not create it. Some scholars think setting Christmas on a significant imperial holiday was politically useful for Christianity once it became legalized. But that's different from the idea that it originated as a pagan takeover. So this year, when that particular Scrooge in your life invades your ear space with that same old tired, worn-out story, then you can say, everybody knows someone like that. And if you don't know someone like that, then it's you. You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back.
The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show.
Welcome back to the Tom Daniels Show, and I can see that those silly Puritans are not going to silence Mary Mac. No sirree, bobcat tail. Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. We were talking about how the Puritans believed that Christmas was not a holy thing because anything that caused fun and joy was sinful and bad. Was this just over here in the colonies? Well, no. In 1647, the Puritans came to full power in England, and as British Parliament embraced Puritan rule, England outlawed Christmas. The directive was not symbolic. It was real. Churches were closed. Ministers were forbidden to preach seasonal sermons. Shops were ordered to remain open, making labor a moral expectation. Soldiers patrolling the streets enforced compliance. When citizens hung greenery or prepared special meals, officials yanked down the wreaths, confiscated the food, and arrested the offenders. Music was a particular target. Carols, chants, and seasonal hymns were treated not as innocent tradition, but as dangerous noise. Choirs disbanded. Public singing was scrutinized. For the Puritans, the human voice raised in December, unless confined to approved psalmody, represented disobedience. The silence was intentional, theological, and the law. Contemporary accounts describe bewilderment and resentment. In Canterbury, citizens rioted when authorities tore down decorations. In London, crowds defiantly attempted to gather for clandestine services. The fight was not only political or religious, it was sensory. Bells, once symbols of communal joy and sacred proclamation, fell mute. The absence of ringing bells in winter, a sound previously associated with comfort and hope, became a chilling marker of control. Silence, often thought of as a peaceful or contemplative state, became instead a sign of suppression. The Puritans saw this silence as purity. Many ordinary citizens experienced it as deprivation. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony adopted similar restrictions. In 1659, the colony passed a law fining anyone caught observing any such day as Christmas through feasting or idleness. New England diaries from the period often treat December 25th like any other work day. Men cutting timber, women baking bread, children reciting lessons. There are rare and fascinating exceptions where someone notes a surreptitious visit to a home where a neighbor quietly read a gospel passage or sang a hymn. These whispers of tradition reveal a tension between doctrinal rigor and human instinct. Even in devout households, parents sometimes allowed children to share a piece of sugared fruit, but only after shuttering the windows so no neighbor could see. Now, this tension between official silence and private yearning helps us understand how cultural traditions survive repression. However, it's not as easy to wipe out music as you think, especially sacred or seasonal music. When music is removed from public life, it retreats into memory. Memory becomes practice in closed rooms. Practice becomes resilience. We can almost imagine a family in Boston in 1665 gathering after dark around a hearth, whispering a melody remembered from England, not loudly enough to be overheard, but softly enough to keep the tradition alive. Now, I'm purely speculating with that image, but it aligns with documented accounts from England where some families secretly kept a sprig of holly or hummed forbidden tunes under their breath. It's not open rebellion in the dramatic sense. It's something subtler and perhaps more powerful. It's just simply the refusal to surrender. Why did Puritan suppression ultimately fail? Well, partly because religious uniformity rarely succeeds for very long. It fades out pretty quickly. Partly because political tides shifted. The restoration of the monarchy in 1660 quickly revived Christmas observance. But also because music has a peculiar endurance. Once associated with joy, community, and ritual meaning, it does not evaporate when silenced. It just waits. It remembers. And when allowed to return, it often returns with even greater emotional force than it had before. Christmas in the 18th and early 19th centuries was not yet the full-blown cultural institution it would become in the Victorian era, but the memory of Puritan austerity lingered, and the revival of carols carried a note of reclamation. When Charles Wesley published Hark the Herald Angels Sing in 1739, and when English choirs began reintroducing medieval carols, they were not simply enriching worship. They were rebuilding a seasonal soundscape dismantled by religious doctrine. The 19th century completed that restoration, layering in German carols, Moravian harmonies, and newly composed English hymns alongside the rise of domestic piano culture. The industrial age brought mass-produced hymnals. The printing press democratized musical access. And eventually, Christmas concerts and choral societies filled towns with sound once more. By the 20th century, seasonal music had become not only sacred, but cultural. Radio broadcasts carried choirs into living rooms. Bing Crosby, Nat King Cole, Mahalia Jackson. They all extended Christmas far beyond the church walls. Even secular songs preserved a sense of reverence. White Christmas with its quiet longing. I'll Be Home for Christmas with its wartime ache. And Silent Night, recorded in countless arrangements, all trace a lineage back to that historical void, to a time when silence was not chosen but enforced. The modern season's abundance of sound feels in part like a reaction to that earlier deprivation. When we consider this legacy, one lesson becomes clear. Sound is not an accessory to tradition. It's a pillar of it. The Puritan ban on Christmas failed, not merely because people missed feasting or greenery, but because silence could never replace a song. Music connects belief to emotion, ritual to community, time to memory. In December especially, when nights stretch long and light grows precious, music becomes a kind of cultural hearth. Remove the flame, and the room chills down. Today, when we hear debates about Christmas traditions, whether liturgical or secular, we often miss the deeper historical question, not who owns the holiday, but what gives it shape. Music, in all its forms, remains one of the Christmas holiday's shaping forces. It signals the season, invites reflection, and reminds us that even in the coldest months, the human desire to sing always persists. If a 17th century Boston magistrate stood silently in a snow-covered street, stamping his boots in December, he might have believed that his silence honored God. Meanwhile, in a nearby kitchen just down the street, somebody was probably humming a forbidden tune, and they believed they were doing the exact same thing. Both of them saw devotion, but only one chose silence. As we listen to choirs and carols this season, as we hear bells ringing across city squares or voices rising in modest country churches, we can remember that those sounds were once contested, suppressed, and nearly lost. We inherit a holiday not only built on theology and tradition, but revived through resistance, memory, and music. It is a season acoustically restored from silence. And by the way, if you're noticing a similarity and connection between 17th century Puritans and modern-day cancel culture, you are not wrong. I'm Tom Daniel. Thank you for joining me for this exploration of the dark and bleak Puritan winter and the long and joyous return of song. May your December be filled with sound, not only festive and bright, but thoughtful, grateful, grounded in the knowledge that silence, while valuable in its proper place, should never be imposed on the human instinct to sing. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune into the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels